It is. That's me, Andy Hum, here with Ann Northrup. Ready to go.
All right. How many of you watching on Facebook will be running for Speaker of the House? You do not have to be a member of the House to be the Speaker. So everybody is eligible.
You just have to be out of your mind.
That is true. Or very, very, very bold.
It's been a job that nobody substantial really wants, for other than on the Democrat side, for a long time. I mean, Boehner, Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan then tried to run for president, so he wasn't without ambition.
Well, he had ambition, but...
And we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA and happy LGBTQ History Month. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup, also celebrating Banned Books Week.
In terms of history, folks,
Celebrating may not be the correct term.
Marking.
Yeah.
Even Mayor Adams did. And in terms of LGBTQ history, you've got about 100 years of it right here in front of you, folks.
There's a depressing thought. Let's get to the headlines.
The U.S. Senate has gotten its first Black lesbian member. You may have read about her.
2% of the United States Senate is now lesbians. We'll look at the legacy of California Senator Dianne Feinstein.
The Republican presidential debate was rife with transphobia.
At the very least. But a Texas church is launching a program to get help for trans kids out of state.
And the National March to Protect Trans Youth is October 7th, this Saturday in Orlando, Florida.
Now, just to go back to that previous headline, should that be to get help for trans kids who want to go out of state?
Yes.
Okay. Michigan's High Court has ruled that court officers must be civil to transgender people.
Poland's opposition leader comes out for some trans and gay rights.
The Pope, I can hardly say this, the Pope hints at blessing same-sex couples. Not holding my breath.
Can't he just spit it out? On a very serious side, a beloved gay and AIDS journalist in Philadelphia was shot dead in his home this week.
Terrible story. And Andy will review the Melissa Etheridge Broadway experience and a revival of Pearly Victorious.
2 thumbs up.
Okay.
All right. So Governor Newsom promised a Black woman to replace Senator Feinstein and then said it wouldn't be any of the people seeking the seat now, Barbara Lee. So he went with the president of Emily's list there, LaFonza Butler.
On the left in the picture, with her wife in the red dress in between, holding the Bible for her swearing in. Quite a picture of 3 Black women, 2 of them lesbians, taking power in the United States Senate.
Well, yes, when Kamala Harris became vice president, Newsom replaced her with a Latin man, Alex Padilla. And so there was a lot of pressure when he got asked. So the next appointment, if there was one, would it be a Black woman? And he said, yes, it would. So there we are. Now, there's the whole family there, their whole beautiful family.
Yes. LaFonza Butler on the right with her wife, Naneki, on the left, and their daughter in between,
yes.
Nyla.
Now, but Newsom has changed his story, I think, for political reasons here. It was going to be an interim appointment, but now he's saying if she wants to run, she can run. Of course, that could really screw it up for Barbara Lee, splitting the black vote. But of course, there's a lot of, this isn't inside politics. This is politics. I think Newsom is sort of favoring Adam Schiff, who was the pick of Nancy Pelosi and their donors, because he wants to run for president. But let's talk about LaFonza Butler a bit. She, in addition to her latest job was being the head of Emily's List, which is dedicated to electing women candidates, especially on the issue of choice. But she was once the president of SEIU, Local 2015, the largest labor union in California, representing nursing home and home health care workers. But then she took a job with a political consulting firm, and she worked against unionization of Uber drivers, which, that kind of stuff disturbs me a bit, I have to say, because that's where her money was coming from.
I would only insert that was relatively brief compared to her union leadership, and she left there and went on to take the helm at Emily's List. So we all make mistakes.
And that's the firm that handles people like Adam Schiff, actually, and his campaign.
Well, it is complicated, the run for this seat, because you're right. Newsom and Pelosi are Schiff supporters. I don't know who's supporting Katie Porter. And then there's Barbara Lee. But Barbara Lee, in that triumvirate of candidates, is not given a huge chance.
She's the most progressive, but she also has by far the least money.
And if you put LaFonza Butler into the equation, if she stands out in the next year, if she has a very successful experience in the Senate, she could leapfrog all of them and
sweep the primaries in March. It's coming up very soon.
It is, and he also gets a twofer here, because in addition to appointing a black woman to the seat to fulfill that promise, he's been in a little hot water with the LGBTQ community recently because he vetoed that bill about trans kids in custody fights. And even though he signed 8 other bills that did the right thing, people have been ragging on him a little. So by appointing not only a black woman, but a black lesbian, he regains a little cred with our communities.
So
I'm just thrilled that Tammy Baldwin is now joined by LaFonza Butler as out lesbians in the United States Senate. 2 of us now, and all those closeted men. It's just shameful to line up these 2 brave women against all these cowards in the United States Senate.
Any names you care to mention?
Well, we could start with Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, and I understand Tom Cotton may be questionable, and there's a whole list.
Right. Well, Tammy Baldwin's up for re-election next year in Wisconsin there, and the other out LGBTQ person is another woman, Kirsten Sinema of Arizona.
All right, 3. I'm sorry.
She's bisexual, and she's an independent now. And she hasn't actually declared for re-election. I'm not sure what she's up to. She's got a Democratic opponent, somebody running for the Democratic nomination to oppose her.
Yes, Raul Grivala. And it also gives me a chance to correct something I said last week, because when we discussed Carrie Lake, I was just throwing her out because she ran for governor last time. But in fact, she is now a declared candidate for the Senate seat, and that is Sinema's seat in the Senate. So it will be Carrie Lake on the Republican side, unless she comes up with an opponent too for the primaries, and Grivala running as a Democrat, and Sinema who knows what.
Well, anyway, certainly it's history making. A lot of history made in the Congress this week.
3 out LGBTQ people in the United States Senate.
Right.
3 women.
That is progress. We're not doing that well
Shocking.
In many other sectors. But let's talk about the passing of Dianne Feinstein.
Okay.
Dead at the age of 90. give the press credit for noting that she became mayor of San Francisco through the assassination of George Moscone when she was president of the Board of Supervisors. And of course, it was the time when Harvey Milk was killed at the same time by Dan White. And there she is marching in a memorial march for Harvey Milk. Moscone had defeated her for mayor, and she was about to retire for politics when he was killed. The press also noted that she was the first to find Harvey Milk's slain body and tried to take his pulse, but her finger went into one of the bullet holes in his hand or arm. That, she later said, made her a lifelong advocate for gun regulations, successfully championing the last assault weapons ban that we had. And she famously also took on the CIA.
She did, for their torture of foreign prisoners. She had a mixed record, or an evolving record, on LGBT issues when she took over as mayor, and the AIDS epidemic became evident in the early 80s. She took over in 78, I think, or 79. She wanted the San Francisco bathhouses closed. She was quite adamant about that, and the community was not thrilled about that idea.
And Harvey Milk's successor was Harry Britt, also out gay, and he proposed a very modest domestic partners bill for city employees. And at the behest of the Catholic archbishop, she vetoed that bill. So that was pretty awful. Now, and they didn't get domestic partners benefits in San Francisco until 1989.
She also, in more recent years, was very helpful to the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the United States Supreme Court.
Well, that's true. And she, in her later years, she was, she should have retired a long time ago. She was not that effective. On the other hand, she said she got into running for the Senate because she saw all the men in the hearings. There were nothing but men questioning Clarence Thomas, and she was appalled by this, and of course Anita Hill, and that's what got her in, and she got elected in tandem with the other woman of the Senate, California, at the same time,
Barbara Boxer,
and I think they were the only two women at the Senate at the time. The only two women.
It's possible. I think, Barbara Mikulski, I think, was still there at the time. And Barbara Mikulski, closeted lesbian, was the only woman, I think, in the Senate when Feinstein was elected. So
I may be wrong about the numbers of women there, because there are a whole bunch of them.
Well, Feinstein, to her credit, was one of the few who voted against the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy and the Defense of Marriage Act.
There were only 14 senators who voted against the Defense of Marriage Act, and she was.
Yeah, so that's a gold star. But she also thought we went too fast on marriage.
Yeah, she criticized Gavin Newsom when he did those what turned out to be rogue marriage ceremonies there in San Francisco. She certainly championed AIDS funding, and she was basically a centrist, an institutionalist who would not acknowledge that the rules of the game had changed in Washington. California can do better, and I hope they're going to do better with LaFonza Butler. I know people have a lot of regard for the glass ceilings that Dianne Feinstein broke, and she certainly was a pioneer in that respect for women. And she's credited of mentoring a lot of women in politics.
And I really appreciate her work in exposing the CIA torture.
She finally did that because they went after some people on her staff, and I think she was a little upset with that.
Well, for whatever reason she did it, it was a lonely battle.
Obama opposed her.
Yes. Presidents want the power to do whatever they want, including beating people up and waterboarding them. But she stuck to her guns and exposed what was going on. And I think that really impresses me for something that was not easy to do.
So what's going on in Washington this week?
I am declaring my candidacy for Speaker of the House
You have my
because
support.
anybody, thank you, Andy. I'm sure that'll get me over the finish line. Anybody can hold that job. You do not have to be a member of the House. They've asked Trump whether he will be available for it. He said, well, I would if I thought I could help, but really, I just want to be president again. But anybody could be Speaker of the House. And that
It's
just
shocking that the first declared candidate is Jim Jordan, who, of course, has been involved in a scandal from when he was a wrestling coach in Ohio, where he covered up the molestation, the sexual abuse of many of those boys, young men.
terrible. He should be in jail.
Right. Oh, so in New York, where
Sorry.
the trial of Donald Trump is underway. And again, we are so grateful to our friends at Rise and Resist. They're at Trump Tower. Let's show it.
Well, this is a Photoshop, which I think is very clever. Trump Tower going out of business, total liquidation, store closing, for sale. They just did a beautiful job. This actually, let me see, I can get the credit here. Rick Wiseman of Rise and Resist did these Photoshops. This one's a little darker and harder to see, but it's Attorney General Letitia James, New York State office building.
Well, Tish Tower. Her name is Letitia. Tish
Yes.
Tower. So,
Yes.
but and Rise and Resist was basically one of the only groups out there for the start of the trial. There were hardly any Trump supporters, but Rise and Resist was there on Trump's case as he goes in and out of court there.
And have been there since. They're out there every day with signs. Not a huge crowd, but enough to get them on the news.
They are indefatigable.
Yeah, they are, and they have been for years now, especially outside Fox News in Midtown week after week with demonstrations there. And they are making sure that the public knows that there are many of us who are just thrilled to see Trump on trial.
Let's go to the Republican debate. They're all out. On the debate last week I think it was Wednesday night. They were all out trying to outdo each other on transphobia. The most vile being Ramaswamy, who called being transgender a mental health disorder. It's not compassionate to affirm a kid's confusion. That's not compassion, it's cruelty. Said he'd ban chemical castration, which is, of course, what was done to Alan Turing when he was found out to be gay in the 1950s in Britain, and genital mutilation. Now, Pence got asked by the Univision reporter about how he's going to address the rising tide of violence against LGBTQ people. And he dodged the question by saying, he'd stand up for the safety and civil liberties of every American, and then quickly pivoted to trans bashing. We're going to pass a federal ban on transgender chemical or surgical surgery. That's what he said. Anywhere in the country. We're going to
not a peep of disagreement between them on this.
We're going to protect our kids from the radical gender ideology agenda. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that really offended me that Pence said, he was asked what he would do about mass shootings at schools. How are you going to stop that? And he said, the words coming to my mind, I will censor myself. His answer to mass shootings at schools was, we are going to reinstitute the death penalty for those shooters. Half of them are dead already.
And DeSantis, in the debate said, we're not going to allow them to inject transgenderism into kindergarten. He always likes to go to the lower grades. Of course, he's banned all mention of these things through being in a nursing home. Trump last week took time from his road to prison by speaking out against sexual mutilation of children whisked away from their parents.
It's more scapegoating. It's more fear mongering. The Republicans have been doing this for decades. They've done it with abortion. They've done it with LGBT people in general. And now this is their latest plank of their platform. All they try to do is scare people into voting for them.
Well, they're bringing the nation down. We're slipping. though it's not news to viewers of Gay USA. There's an annual study of 204 countries measuring LGBTQ rights, and they downgraded the US based on 2020 figures to a C from a B, ranking us about 31st. It's called the Franklin and Marshall Global Barometers Report. And they expect us to go down to an F the next time.
I would think so.
Because of all that's happened.
Yeah.
62% of countries get an F, 35% a C. In the 2010 to 2020 period, however, 24 countries legalized same-sex marriage. 8 others decriminalized homosexuality, though 71 still do.
And more on that when we get to international news. And one disturbing thing, they've been proposing and passing these laws, bathroom bills, sports, trans youth care, but we've been pretty successful across the board in going into court and getting these laws blocked from implementation. Got a pretty good track record, but this last week we had a couple of losses that were disturbing in Tennessee and Kentucky. In Tennessee, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the higher court, of course, from the district court, refused to block a law that bans care for trans youth and ends current care, anyone currently being cared for with hormones or whatever, as of March 31st next year.
Well, they ban all these like things like hormone therapy and beta blockers for trans care, but these same treatments may be available to other young people for any other reason.
Yeah. Now, district courts in 7 states have struck these laws down, but as they go up to the next level, to these appeals courts, we are starting to get some different results. And there's a strange one in Nebraska that is a little mixed, I think, although I don't think anybody on our side is happy about this. But Nebraska has instituted some new regulations for trans youth. You can get hormones, puberty blockers, whatever, as a trans youth, but you have to go through 40 hours of clinically neutral, they call it clinically neutral therapy, although people are afraid this is conversion therapy actually and will not be neutral. And you also have to go through a 7-day waiting period, which
this was all issued by their chief medical officer for the state, Timothy Tesmer, who was appointed by Republican Governor Pillen and has voiced his opposition to all forms of gender-affirming care for minors. The ACLU said that the required therapy was particularly onerous, given the fact that there aren't that many mental health providers in Nebraska.
Exactly. And the regulations also bar any surgery for anyone under 19. But that's very rare anyway. But any of these regulations that get between patients and their parents and their doctors is just offensive on every level. They're doing it with abortion, and they're doing it here, but not when they're concerned. Then there are no regulations.
In better news, in Delaware, they banned the LGBTQ plus panic defense with overwhelming bipartisan support. Now, no state allows the defense to be used on its own, but it's often used alongside other defense strategies as a way to advocate for leniency. Well, yeah, he did it, but he was
scared.
He was scared of the gays or the trans. Yeah. So out trans Sarah McBride, now running for U.S. Congress there, was the chief sponsor in the state Senate. All Republicans voted against the bill in the House, but it passed unanimously in the Senate. I guess it helps to have a transgender member.
Exactly, who may end up in Congress after next year's elections.
Well, the Republicans will probably find a way not to seat her. Well, I mean, they would elect communists to the Congress sometimes, and they'd say, "You're not sitting here." Bye.
Aren't they about to kick out Matt Gaetz? Aren't they going to eject him from Congress?
It would be sweet.
It would. And a few other, the irony of the Republicans, using the Democrats' votes to get rid of Kevin McCarthy because he's worked with Democrats. Can't make this stuff up.
All right. In some other political news, in New York City, pioneering gay activist Alan Roscoff, the founder of the Jim Owls Liberal Democratic Club, is leading an effort to recruit a progressive challenger to Mayor Adams in the 2025 primary, criticizing Adams for using right-wing talking points and dealing with the influx of asylum seekers, and remains critical of the right-wing anti-LGBTQ bigots that Adams gave high posts to in the administration.
Well, that's a real problem. You should not; those people should not be rewarded with government jobs. But I don't know how Alan is going to have time to do this, given that he's sitting in the front row of the Trump trial every day.
It's true. There he is.
It's fun to see him there.
I will say, however, because we are very fair on this program, that Mayor Adams said the city will make abortion care available by telehealth to New Yorkers through the Health and Hospitals Corporation, with the ability to deliver abortion pills within days and provide counseling. You just have to call 718-360-8981. People from out of state would have to be staying here to receive the care, just like many come here to receive the care.
Well, I'm also struck by the fact that last week we were talking about the New York Civil Liberties Union blasting the Department of Education in New York for its outdated, often erroneous HIV curriculum in schools, and often not enforced or practiced. And then this week we have the Department of Education in New York City publishing a new updated HIV curriculum for grades K through 12. Clearly, they didn't come up with this overnight. They've been working on this presumably a long time, and
no one run it by me. We used to.
Those are the old days, Andy, when they would run things by us.
Look, I was once invited when we worked for Hetrick Martin Institute for lesbian and gay youth at the time to go to Albany for a whole week to rewrite the state AIDS education thing. This had to be in the 1990s, and we did a very fair, balanced job, you could say. And then it was objected to by the Bishop of Brooklyn, and they just shredded it based on that objection.
Of course. Look, I was asked to write a draft of a Bill Clinton speech on HIV and AIDS, and that went right in the shredder.
Someday I would like to hear you deliver it on the program.
I might still have a copy of that. I will look eventually.
We got a New York event to tell you about. Gay Liberation Front veteran Martha Shelley, who you saw on this show, is going to be on a panel with Gay Liberation Front's Perry Brass, Mark Siegel, Flavio Rondo, Mark Horn, and John Nebel on Sunday, October 15th at 3 p.m. It will be at the center, right? It will be live streamed at youtube.com at BGSQD. The link will be provided in our email.
This is going to be Martha reading some from her book, The Gay Liberation Front, Making History. No, I'm sorry, that's the title of the event. The book title is We Set the Night on Fire, Igniting the Gay Revolution. It's a terrific book, and she talked about it here. And these are the pioneers. And they all have great stories to tell, and they're all fascinating to listen to. So that is Sunday, the 15th, a week from this Sunday at 3 p.m. at the center.
By the way, before Congress stopped functioning entirely, disgraced Representative Lauren Boebert slipped an amendment into the Agriculture Appropriations Bill, banning the USDA from educating its leadership about LGBTQ employees in order to make LGBTQ employees feel safer in the workplace, which she terms leftist indoctrination. It passed by just 3 votes, including one Democrat, Ryan Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, unlikely to survive reconciliation with the Senate version of the bill.
Well, this is what I'm nervous about. The Republicans are replacing their speaker because they didn't pass enough appropriations bills, among other things, before a deadline that was set. They still have a ton of them to pass. And every single one of those proposed bills is full of stuff like this. And even if they pass them, then the Senate will pass entirely different versions, and then they'll have to go to a conference committee. And
with people who don't compromise.
How are they going to reconcile these things? They aren't. So is
Right.
that stuff going to stay in? Are the Democrats going to find a way to get the Republicans to agree to something that doesn't have those bad things? Hard to imagine.
All right. In Salem, Massachusetts, the witch trials are back on. 25-year-old Mohammed Saeed Rajab was arrested for anti-LGBTQ vandalism throughout the historic town, targeting the Tabernacle Congregational Church, pride flags at the local animal shelter in Public Park, and several rainbow crosswalks. Cancel LGBTQ 2024, he spray painted on the church door. He has been charged with hate crimes.
And in Fresno, California, out council member Annalisa Perea says that she is the target of anti-LGBT vandalism and slurs. They're coming after her directly. There's a lot of independent vigilantism sweeping the country.
Right.
And in Wisconsin,
they're all revved up by their leaders.
Of course. And in Door County, Wisconsin, they have passed a local ordinance that allows only U.S., state, county, MIA, and military branch flags on county flagpoles. This is targeted, of course, at pride flags, which have been flown on the county flagpole in celebration of Pride Month, or maybe History Month this month, but no more. And they also passed resolutions that life begins at conception, and that fetuses can be listed as tax dependents.
We are going to get to some better news, but more bad news. Huntsville, Alabama, the library director ordered a mass relocation of LGBTQ books from the children's section to the adult section. The director said she cross-referenced a list of challenged titles, but that list does not exist in the Alabama Public Library Service. The director just looked for books with the words lesbian, gay, gender, a very bad word, identity, another very bad word. One got moved because the author's name was Mary Louise Gay.
I went to high school with a girl whose first name was Gay. Yeah. Still is. She is not. And from your favorite town in California, Temecula, I won't make you say it this week, they removed the plus from LGBTQ in a local pride declaration because they're convinced that the plus means BDSM.
Why not?
They did defeat a proposal to keep the words Stonewall Uprising out of the Pride Declaration.
Well, better news from Fort Worth. We have a picture of this. The Galileo Church is assisting families who need to travel out of state to get treatment for their trans children with $1,000 grants. It's for families in the 19-county northern Texas area. The grants are distributed as the funds become available.
It's a rare week when we haven't gotten to Florida until now, but first of all, a group of trans and non-binary people have filed a federal suit against the bathroom law in Florida that requires them to use the bathroom consistent with their birth gender. So they're fighting that. And in Orlando, this Saturday, the 7th, there will be a national march to protect trans youth with speakers like Miss Major and LGBTQ Teamsters leaders.
And they intend, trans and non-binary people who are suing, by the way, down there are going to challenge the law of civil disobedience requiring people to use public restrooms that only align with their sex assigned at birth. Violators can be charged with criminal trespass. So they're going to risk arrest in advance of the march. Some, on the other hand, are going to forego public restrooms for fear of arrest. So go to protecttranskidsmarch.org. It kicks off at noon near City Hall.
Right. And congratulations to New York City's Ali Forney Center, which opened a new headquarters this week. Much, big and 24-hour drop-in center. And
what is the Ali Forney Center, Anne?
It's for LGBTQ plus youth of all persuasions. Are they still doing housing? They must be doing some housing.
Absolutely.
Yes, but this is their new headquarters and drop-in center. For a while, New York City had a law that said you couldn't have overnight drop-in centers. And the executive director of the Ali Forney Center said, the hell with you. I will perform civil disobedience. You are not going to tell me I have to kick kids out of this place at 6 p.m. or whatever. And it was changed, and they are allowed to have their 24-hour drop-in center.
Also, good news from Michigan. The state Supreme Court ruled that all judges in the state must respect the pronouns of the parties who are before them. The state Justice Elizabeth Welch wrote in the 5-2 ruling that the rule does not force anyone to violate their beliefs. Said judges are required to treat those who come before them with civility and respect. The gender identity of a member of the public is a part of their individual identity, regardless of whether others agree or approve.
Back to more bad news. In White Plains, New York, just north of New York City, a gender nonconforming lesbian, Jamelia J. Peters, is suing Starbucks. She had worked there for quite a while and had a great track record, but she was denied a promotion by a straight woman manager who complained that Jay looked gay and looked like a boy, and therefore promoted people who didn't. So Jay is suing. Good luck to her. Also in Illinois, a group calling itself New Trier Neighbors, New Trier being a northern suburb, has been going around posting posters around the neighborhood that are anti-LGBTQ, and that has provoked bomb threats at the schools in the neighborhood.
In New York City, we have a picture of this. Advocates for justice for out gay Kowalski Trewick rallied outside police headquarters with elected officials to protest the NYPD's recommendation of no discipline for the 2 cops who killed him, and to demand that the police commissioner fire them. It's quite a moving picture.
It is, and just a terrible, terrible story of a poor guy who was just gunned down in his kitchen while cooking. Let's talk about some other people we've lost this week. First of all, Josh Kruger in Philadelphia, gay, HIV positive activist and journalist, 39 years old, murdered by an intruder, shot to death. He was a very well-known and loved journalist and activist in Philadelphia, had been through some terrible times in his own life, struggling with addiction and homelessness, and come out the other side with a lot of courage and power.
He'd also been the spokesperson for Philadelphia's Office of Homeless Services. And he returned to journalism in 2021, writing about the LGBTQ community, city and state politics, and more, informed, as you say, by his own experiences. DA Larry Krasner said that Josh lifted up the most vulnerable and stigmatized people in our communities, particularly unhoused people living with addiction. And the mayor, Jim Kenney, praised his intelligence, creativity, and compassion in public service and writing. He lived with his best friend, a one-toothed cat named Mason, who you have heard has found a home. But what a story. He posted on, it's a little confusing about his death. He posted on Facebook that a man he'd never seen before came to his home searching for their boyfriend and calling themselves Lady Diablo, the she-devil of the streets, and threatened him. So we don't know quite what happened here, do we?
We do not, but we know that he was just peacefully at home when someone came into his house and shot him dead. So a lot of speculation, but no answers yet. He was known as I don't know whether he called himself this or someone else called him, a destroyer of stigma and bureaucratic silos.
Yeah, he just had an article in Paz Magazine about going off his HIV meds. I'm going off my HIV meds because he was taking the injections and how he was making the transition to that. So he was very, very involved in all the issues of the day.
I think he was a cover boy for Paz. All right, and then in a nursing home in Connecticut, Beverly Willis, 95 years old, architect, actually an artist first and muralist, and became an architect. Survived by her. Is her wife still alive? Wanda Brubisky.
Survived by her spouse, Wanda, yes, who was an architectural historian.
Yeah, she was. Beverly was just relentless in supporting women in architecture and all fields. She created a foundation to do that. She has a website listing like the 50 greatest women architects. She made a film about New York City, a city built by women,
including the woman who built the Brooklyn Bridge.
And the building you saw behind her in that picture, if you can
put it up again, yeah, the picture,
is the San Francisco Ballet Building, the first building built specifically for a ballet company, a really magnificent building.
Back in 1983. She was self-taught. She ran her own firm. She started a foundation in New York. She was a leader.
And also known for rehabbing historic buildings to modern use. And then in Puerto Rico, a trans man, Luis Angel Diaz Castro, 22 years old, murdered by his ex-domestic partner. He had reported him for domestic violence, but that evidently was not enough to save his life.
And in other crime news, the former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Mike Jeffries, was exposed by a BBC documentary of engaging in sex trafficking of male models that he hired or auditioned at U.S. events and around the world. 8 men have come forward. They were told that the events would not involve sex, and then they were ordered to submit to oral sex or to have sex with on him, or he would have oral sex on them, or they would have sex with each other. He says it was all consensual, but a federal investigation has been called for about what he was up to.
Well, he sounds like the Jeffrey Epstein of the gay world. Very similar. Guys offered modeling jobs, brought into a situation, coerced into sex, handed large amounts of cash afterwards. The only thing I would say might be different is these were young men, but they were not 14-year-olds, which was more what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. So there's some question about to what extent these guys were forced, but they were certainly put in untenable situations. All right. International news.
Well, the opposition leader in Poland, Donald Tusk, first of all, they had a massive rally. I mean, 1 million people in Warsaw ahead of the election. Promises that if his centrist party is elected, that Poland will legally recognize same-sex partnerships, not marriage, and it will be easier for transgender people to self-identify. The ruling conservatives are running on bashing LGBTQ rights. Tusk said in response to a student question, love deserves respect.
Well, let's not forget that this is a country that a couple of years ago was declaring LGBT-free zones, yes, and that has been tremendously terrible to LGBT people under these right-wing governments for some years now. So for him to emerge as a popular figure seems astonishing.
Well, he's trailing in the polls 38-30, but that's just 38-30. Nobody's over 50%. So whoever comes in first is going to need smaller parties to form a government.
But will it be a rigged election?
Well, it is. I mean, this 1 million people rally that his party had was barely covered on state television. They just don't cover things.
I don't have a lot of faith that any more than I have faith that you can have a free and fair election in Russia or China or lots of other places. I am concerned about whether you can do that in Poland.
Let's talk about
the
Holy Father.
You go right ahead.
So, in response to a challenge from right-wing clerics, he suggested that people in same-sex unions could be blessed by Catholic priests on a case-by-case basis. He said marriage can only be between a man and a woman, but that when you ask for a blessing, you're expressing a request for help from God, a prayer to be able to live better. The clergy, he wrote, must show pastoral prudence and adequately discern if there are forms of blessing requested by one or various people which do not convey a wrong concept of marriage. That's a lot of gobbledygook. I mean, just
don't mistake this for legalizing same-sex marriage.
It is an advance on his last pronouncement that the church couldn't bless same-sex unions because they could not bless sin.
By inch by inch. And this is all in the context of a synod that is taking place momentarily, where they're expected to discuss this possibility and discuss the place of women in the church and,
Well, no gay delegates to this thing. Well, openly gay delegates, I imagine half the.
Yeah, let's do that.
But the Reverend James Martin, S.J., is one of the delegates and who writes about advancing LGBTQ people in the church. But even he doesn't expect doctrine that we're disordered to be changed. Dignity USA, the gay Catholic group, LGBTQ Catholic group, is sending Mary Ann Duddy Burke, their executive director, to be there and to respond to the press and others, but no delegates.
Meanwhile, the small island of Mauritius off the east coast of Africa, east of Madagascar, it's a tiny little island. The Supreme Court there, this is their Pride Festival. The Supreme Court has ruled that their sodomy law is discriminatory and unconstitutional, and that homosexuality is an innate natural variant. And while heterosexual sex may be natural for heterosexuals, gay sex is what's natural for gay people, which is what we used to tell school children 40 years ago in the schools of New York City.
I see that those signs were from the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter.
Yeah, well, that's where his website is where I got the news, but everything's up to date in Mauritius. And in India, any minute now, actually about 2 weeks from now, we're expecting a possible decision in the marriage case.
Was that Ding, the decision?
I'll look in a minute when you're talking about Michael Gambon. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is retiring on his 65th birthday because that's the limit for Supreme Court justices. Would that it were so here. And so the thinking is that as he retires, the court will issue its decision on same-sex marriage. Cross your fingers.
I do want to mention the passing of the great Gambon. Michael Gambon, the actor, has died at 82. He was really an actor's actor on stage and screen. Most people seem to know him for playing Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies, but also the singing detective years ago. Shakespeare, David Hare's Skylight. I saw him on Broadway. He played a gay poetry professor in The Good Shepherd, the movie directed by Robert De Niro with Matt Damon in 2006. He acknowledged in interviews that he'd had his own gay experiences when he was younger, although he may have been joshing about that. While he was still playing Dumbledore, however, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling revealed that Dumbledore is gay. And he simply said, doesn't make any difference how I'm going to play him.
And he also talked about having same-sex relations early in his life.
He did, but I mean, he liked to fool around in interviews, so he just liked to say things to get people all excited. And he was just wonderful to see on stage. He was transfixing, and I got to see him about 3 times in his life. Anyway. Staying in Britain, the anti-LGBTQ government of Rishi Sunak was stopped by the Attorney General from issuing guidance to schools that trans students should be reported to their parents. So the National Health Service issued the guidance to the schools instead on a non-medical matter. This is on top of the government's dropping legislation to ban conversion therapy and its hostility to gay asylum seekers.
Okay.
And the Slovakia election's not good for the gays. Even though it was a leftist former prime minister, Robert Fico, he led with 30% of the seats. He's also anti-LGBTQ and wants to drop support for Ukraine, and he's pro-Russian.
Oh boy. And in Israel and Tel Aviv, 2 men have been convicted and sentenced to years in prison for drugging and robbing men that they have solicited on Grindr. They also have to pay compensation to 23 victims. As always, we warn you, be careful of these dating sites. They can get you in trouble if you are alone with someone you don't know.
Well, the latest scam is going after young men, teenage boys especially, pretending to be a girl, flirting with them, getting a nude picture, and then extorting them. So watch out for that. Watch out for that as well, boys.
Really, I know you're famously ruled by hormones at that age, but you got to be a little smarter and a little careful about what you're doing.
And I wish they'd be more. Can we move to AIDS news?
Yes.
Be more careful. George W. Bush, who's perhaps one saving grace, was getting the PEPFAR program going, Global AIDS Initiative, called on Congress to reauthorize the program for 5 more years and said it would be a national shame if it was allowed to expire. I don't think shame is in the modern Republican vocabulary, however. Bush wrote that it's stalled over questions about whether the program is sufficiently pro-life. He wrote that there is no program more pro-life than one that has saved 25 million lives. But Representative Chris Smith, we got a picture of him there, of New Jersey, has been holding it up, claiming the Biden guidance on PEPFAR has led to funds going towards abortion rights movements in foreign countries. PEPFAR does not fund abortion, but these Republicans believe in forced birth.
Well, this fight's been going on for decades, ever since this program was first invented, and others too. They've gone through some years where they were quite explicit about banning any PEPFAR funds going to agencies in Africa that referred people to abortions, supplied abortions, whatever, completely separately from their HIV work. And then Obama got rid of that rule, and now Chris Smith wants it back. Chris Smith is a notorious and relentless anti-abortion campaigner, and he's just raised this all over again. It doesn't make any sense, but this is his opportunity to get some publicity, raise money for himself, whatever. But this, if you start linking in this kind of way, you can destroy all sorts of things around the world, depending on what's going on at any given agency or company. And this is just shameful that he's doing this, but this is what he's doing.
No shame.
And
look,
one of my objections to PEPFAR is that it was created at the time when there already existed the global fund against HIV and tuberculosis, and Bush created this so that the U.S. could control the money and set up these kinds of rules against agencies that promoted abortion. And I thought it was very arrogant and jingoistic to set up this program as opposed to just giving the money to the global fund.
Back to the United Kingdom, now shoplifting in retail is certainly a problem, but Richard Walker, the CEO of the supermarket chain Iceland there, falsely claimed that 3 of his workers had contracted HIV after needle attacks by looters. The Terrence Higgins Trust, the AIDS group there, called on him to apologize. He took 6 days to correct the story, but did not apologize.
And meanwhile, in Florida, 2 men have been convicted of supplying fake HIV drugs to pharmacies, suppliers, patients, $230 million worth of drugs.
Adulterated drugs.
Yes. The first guy is going to prison for 15 years. The second guy has pleaded guilty and is awaiting sentence. But this is millions and millions of dollars of fake drugs so that they could make millions and millions of dollars. Congratulations to Broadway Cares, whose flea market last weekend raised a record amount of $1.237 million for people with AIDS and other needs.
All the stars turned out. Harvey Fierstein was there, and Cherry Jones and Michael Urie, just to mention some of the LGBTQ folks. Okay.
Let's get to some of your reviews.
Well, I sat through Melissa Etheridge, My Window, at the Circle on the Square, and I realized that we've covered Melissa as a leading lesbian activist for years, and I'd never heard much of her music. And
Andy.
It's a delightful show, and it's a twofer. It's a rockin' up close Melissa Etheridge concert, and it's a guided tour of her whole life, told by her with rare candor, warmth, humor, and purpose. Now 62, she's almost alone in her generation of rock stars in leading a publicly out life since the early 1990s, and a woman-loving life since childhood. This is a show that will appeal to the many fans of her music and those of us who honor her work as an activist. But far from being a polemic, it's a tribute to the human spirit. She opens up about her birth family, her chosen families, her unique work as a woman rock star, her ups and downs in love and health, and as a mother, and her fearlessness as an advocate. It's a rare treat, not to be missed. And then Pearly Victorious. This was written by Ossie Davis back in 1961. It's one of the most subversive, funniest, and entertaining plays about race that you will ever see. It was long overdue for a revival, and director Kenny Leon gives it a great one, starring there in the middle Leslie Odom Jr. from Hamilton and Cara Young, last seen in the blue dress, last seen in Cost of Living on Broadway. It's subtitled A Non-Confederate Romp Through the Cotton Patch, and takes place in the recent past, when the old Confederacy had not given up on white supremacy, and what could be more timely today. Biden should host it at the White House and invite the MAGA caucus. I see lots of Tony Awards in the future for this show.
Yeah, it seems to be getting great rave reviews. I never saw it in its original production or now, but
Eleanor Roosevelt gave it a great review, and it's on the front of the theater.
Well, I had this assumption that it was sort of old-fashioned, so I'm delighted.
Not at all. Ossie Davis,
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. The United Kingdom show Naked Attraction is on Max now. I've seen it on TV in London. Contestants choose among 6 naked contestants, part of their bodies revealed in stages. It's harmless, but not very sexy, but it does include same-sex contestants.
Okay. And one more event this weekend on Saturday at the Center here in New York City, at 208 West 13th Street at 3 p.m. A tribute to Urvashi Vad, who we lost, and it's going to be quite an extravaganza, and it will include a film by Jeb, Joan Byron. So that's this Saturday at 3 p.m. at the Center. And
we're also out of time. I'll just alert you to 2 gay films coming out. Birder, not with Christian Cooper, on there. It's going to be at the Seattle Queer Film Festival. And Down Low, which is going to be on digital platforms on October 10th.
Bye.